And I'd like to invite to the podium this evening the Honourable Marsha Caddle, Minister of Industry, Innovation, Science and Technology, to deliver our featured address.
Thanks, Carol. Good evening, everyone. The rain has, I hope, broken up the formality a bit. You know, we've got drizzled together and, you know, in various states of Friday evening. So that means that we're all friends now. That brings a certain level of intimacy, I hope. When I was walking in with Adrian, I warned him that I am not very much a why and where to for kind of speaker. And I really like to have conversations. And I think the Barbados Manufacturers Association, on the occasion of your 60th anniversary, is the perfect time to have a family conversation. The Barbados Manufacturers Association has been, for Barbados and for this government of Barbados, a part of our family. And I think that this model of governance is one that perhaps other jurisdictions may not understand. In the context of the social partnership, in the context of our relationship as Export Barbados and manufacturers, in the context of our relationship with as Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, with manufacturers and with the association, we use that partnership, the platform of partnership, to contribute equally to the development of the country. And I think that that social partnership model is one that means that our relationship as private sector and public sector is a bit different from what people in other countries and jurisdictions and parts of the world might be used to. Perhaps one of the best examples of that was already referenced tonight, which was during the pandemic. The private sector, variously represented, including by the Barbados Manufacturers Association, sat with us as government, sat with the trade union movement and others, and really had to originate a response jointly. And that is one of the things of which I am most proud of how we govern collectively in Barbados. So I want to be able to congratulate the BMA on your 60 years, but also on the legacy of manufacturing in Barbados and the region. You know, the trajectory of development of Barbados has been an interesting one. It is one, as John said earlier, which has seen the share of manufacturing as a percentage of GDP dwindle. Right now, our official numbers tell us, and I know some people will argue, but that's why I said our official numbers tell us, that the contribution is around 5.5% as official manufacturing as measured as a percentage of GDP. But we also know that that does not capture all of the linkages and the intersectoral nature of economies in Barbados. We know that without the manufacturing sector, we would not have a lot of the necessary inputs for tourism, a lot of the necessary inputs for agriculture and other sectors, and also for our growing services sector. And so it is not a simple computation to be able to assess that percentage and that contribution to the economy. We know that the manufacturing sector has also similarly had a strong legacy of enfranchisement. And that is perhaps part of the trajectory that I talk about. To be frank, the history of the economic platforms and pillars in Barbados is one we all know well. And we know that that history has not been one that has historically been based on a model of economic enfranchisement and opportunity for all. But I'm proud to say that we have companies, businesses, individuals, brands reflected here in the Barbados Manufacturers Association and present here tonight that have helped us shift that model. And I'm proud to stand in partnership as the government of Barbados with some of those brands and some of you here tonight. I always get in trouble when I start to single out people, so I'm not going to do that. But I am going to say that as I look around the room, I see models of business and models of enfranchisement and economic participation that we can hold up as the ways in which we want our businesses to include Barbadians, to include workers, and to offer investment opportunities so that we have a situation where we are distributing prosperity to all Barbadians. That is very much the ideology and philosophy of this government. And in my time with not just the BMA as represented here, but with the social partnership and the private sector in Barbados, I'm also proud to see that there are brands and there are companies that uphold that ideology and that philosophy. And so that is the platform and that is the legacy on which we are advancing and going forward from tonight on. But there are some other considerations that confront us in 2024. Certainly, I hope that what we went through during the pandemic and what we continue to sit and talk through as BMA and government helps to start to provide a model for how we should engage. That we all understand that we have to share the burden as well as the bounty for what confronts us as a small island and what confronts us as a region. When we talk about the climate crisis, we know that one of the things that we have to address is how do we climate-proof our economy? A big part of being able to climate-proof our economy is not just in how we approach logistics. Barbados has long had goals, certainly since 2018, of enhancing our attractiveness as a logistical hub. And we have initiated several efforts to be able to do that. But it is a work in progress, and it is one that requires us to understand and to position ourselves with trading partners that go beyond the traditional partners that we have seen. All of you here will know that we are seeking to deepen our trade relations with the continent of Africa and with others. We consider that we must continue our principle of friends of all and satellites of none. And that means that we have to be able to diversify not just the pillars of our economy, but our trade relations and our relationships and our commercial diplomacy with those with whom we have not traditionally had those kinds of relationships. But climate-proofing our supply chain and climate-proofing our logistics is not just about the investments that we make in ports and the commercial diplomacy in which we engage. It is also, quite frankly, about expanding into other sectors that do not depend so much on logistics and on traditional supply chains. One of those sectors is, of course, technology. And one of the areas of diversification that I've been able to speak about a bit and to explore and to develop as minister in this ministry since January of 2024 has to do with data and technology. It is a threat, but it is also a tremendous opportunity. We saw with the CrowdStrike incident recently that the technology sector has the capacity to affect not just what happens in the sector, but what happens across businesses, across the country, across the world. And so a lot of the investment that we have to make as government is in having a national protected technology infrastructure so that our banking sector, which is the manufacturing sector in which businesses need to function, is also protected from those threats that emerge. And that is one of the things in which we are very much investing. One of the other areas that, as Export Barbados, as BIDC, to which we are returning, is the program of special technical assistance that many of you know about, and that perhaps has not been as strong and as present in recent years. This year, we have reintroduced a focus through Export Barbados on the Special Technical Assistance Program to ensure that we are able to continue to support the environment in which our legacy companies operate, but quite frankly, that we can create new high growth potential companies in Barbados. That is a clear target of this government. And it is one that means that we have to be very specific about what we target. My ministry is now in the process of developing a new industrial policy. And those of you who are hearing my voice may wonder if we are back in the 1970s or 80s. The term industrial policy went out of vogue for quite a while. But we've returned to it because we realize that if countries like ours are not entrepreneurial as a state, if we don't determine that we have to find the high growth potential and to directly support it, that we're not going to be able to compete. And so it will not be your old industrial policy, but it will lay out certainly the sectors, not that we are picking sectors, but that we are creating an environment both through a fiscal incentives framework and other measures that sends the signal to our young people and to entrepreneurs that there is support to be able to support high growth companies in this country, and that can spread throughout the region and also be able to function in global markets. And so we return to the Special Technical Assistance Program, and we also are in the process of developing that industrial policy, which I see some worried faces. It's not a 200-page document that will have a laundry list of things. But I do think that we have to be very crisply and very succinctly be able to signal what are some of the opportunities we think exist from our vantage point, and what are some of the things we think are obvious comparative advantages for us in 2024 and for the next 30 or 50 years. That has to be supported, of course, by the enabling environment. The government has created Business Barbados, has invested more in Export Barbados, and has also sought to expand the mandate and the remit of Invest Barbados. And those three institutions, together with our partners like the BMA, have to, and I say have to, must finally settle on the environmental factors and the enabling factors that mean that there's no more, that we remove the unpredictability in setting up business, in operating as business, that entrepreneurs will find in the marketplace. And those of you who know me will know that I do not take any comfort or joy or rest on pretense. I think that we are at the point in Barbados to have frank and adult conversations about what needs to be fixed. And that's one of the reasons that Business Barbados was set up, to be able to look squarely at issues associated with corporate registry, with intellectual property, with all related issues, and to be able to say, this is the system, this is the simplified way in which we will make it easier to do business. I know that some of you will call me if that starts to take too long. That's all right. I also want to briefly touch on another part of the title of this ministry, which is innovation. And I think that both for existing industry and some of the larger companies, and even in the Barbados context, some of our larger companies are not comparatively that large. But even some of our legacy industry and some of the brands that we recognize very well as we stand here and as we look around, that we also need to bring in an Industry 4.0 approach. And one of the things with which my ministry is concerning itself is how do we help support new innovative practices in business? How do we help entrepreneurs and older companies find better and faster and cleaner energy ways, cleaner tech ways to do the things that they already do and to improve the things that they already do. But we don't want that to just be a narrative. And so one of the things to which we hope to return very soon is to have a National Scientific Research Council that may sound esoteric, but is not. That has its basis and its emphasis in new entrepreneurs who are coming up with new ideas. One of the patterns that we're seeing is definitely in the pharmaceutical industry. And we believe that the linkages that we can establish in Barbados across the visitor economy, people who come to recover, to have procedures, to feel well, to rest, to train in sports, can also be well linked to a pharmaceutical industry that we see emerging. And how do we support that? But it is not something that should be or can be driven by government. And we consider that we have a convening role to play in combining or bringing together entrepreneurs and also the University of the West Indies and the extent to which they are also innovating. But our universities, our tertiary institutions have a challenge, and that is with tech transfer. And so they are working on products and coming up with ideas, but there is a missing link. And the missing link has to do with how do we test, how do we establish IP, address IP issues, and how do we get those products to market. And so one of the things that a National Scientific Research and Development Council we expect will do is to be able to close that loop and to be able to bridge the gap between ideating, developing, testing, and developing for markets. That's something that we consider that a Ministry of Innovation ought to be supporting and to which we ought to be contributing. And we expect very soon to be able to establish an MOU is great and lovely, but we hope to establish something that is more concrete with the University of the West Indies that really speaks to innovation and bringing innovation fully, not just in a marginal way. You know, development economists will tell you that innovation needs to infect your market and it needs to infect your economic model. And how do we bring that from corners where people are trying things to the mainstream of how we actually create new high growth companies every year? I also want to let you know that Cabinet this week agreed to engage in a review of Barbados's trade policies. We think that this is critical because we realize that our trade agreements and our overarching trade policy emerged and was put together at a specific time in our economic and social history, and a specific time in the economic and social history of the world. The geopolitics that obtained at the time have shifted slightly, I dare say, and continue to shift. And so, given the frequent changes in the trade landscape, the dynamic nature of global economic conditions, technological advances, geopolitical shifts, even environmental challenges, we believe that we have to engage in this review of our trade policies. This is something that we expect to be able to do quickly. We expect to be able to engage all of our partners. We have a strong partnership and a good solid track record of working with the BMA to be able to tease out and to really unpack what are the challenges that address us and how do we move from those minute things that we experience on the ground to having those informed trade policy. I know that my friends in BMA, who already talk with me all the time about these things, will consider this an opportunity to have those frank discussions, John, that we always say must then inform the policy, the things that we sign, the agreements that we make, the commitments that we make sure that we are representing our brands, we are representing our people, and that we are creating space in global markets for Barbados and for Barbadians to thrive. I note in my left ear that the bar is very quiet and that I am keeping you from it. So all that is left for me to say is that truly we consider, and I personally consider the BMA one of our most practical partners. And by that I mean that we are able to have conversations about how do we develop Barbados for all people. It's not every country that can say that about its major private sector organizations. And I think that we are privileged to be able so to do. And I hope that that long continues. Thank you very much for your attention this evening.